Hello, my name is Mariam and I like to read and I like to write, and I was inspired to do this video by one of my favourite YouTubers called Murphy Naper. She has a series on her channel where she talks about like books, and she asks her community on YouTube to kind of give her thoughts, give them their thoughts on like maybe main characters, villains, talking about what they like in their endings, what they like in their starters. And I just thought it would be kind of good to do something similar. So like I've been on Tumblr and Reddit and got some comments on like people's pet peeves to do with like what they like in their books, what they don't like in their books, and I wanted to discuss them. These are like specifically picked out because they're things that I've noticed in my own writing. For those who don't know, I like to write, so I was also using this as an opportunity to talk about my writing and perhaps give people advice. I know I'm not very I wouldn't say that I'm like a high kind of writer, but I do think like I have some advice that I'd like to share. So I would love to hear your thoughts on the things that I've chosen. Yeah, just tell me your thoughts, your views. Just to let you know, I do have my comments on my laptop, which is here. So if I keep on looking this way, it's just because that's where the screen I'm reading off of is. The first one is how to use multiple POVs. Step 1, don't. I have like 2 thoughts on this. I remember when I was like a bit younger, like I would say like maybe 15, I would put so many characters in my stories, which the thing is they never were fleshed out, so it just felt so bland. No one really had a personality, which kind of ruined the flow. It ruined the flow of the story a lot. I would say my advice for like beginner writers is maybe perhaps focus on like 1 POV or 2 POVs. That's advice that I also saw somewhere else. Like maybe let's not put so many in your first kind of like writing piece. However, if you do, maybe it was just because I didn't do enough research. If you do enough research, definitely you can try. I thought it was kind of overwhelming. This person spoke about having a love-hate relationship with spines. For they're broken, they're especially impossible to read. But the minute the spine is broken, I will focus on it like there's no tomorrow. Which I completely agree. I don't understand. This is mostly about like the physical books and not necessarily what's inside the books. But I don't get the discourse around breaking book spines. Like, is it not easier to read when they're broken? I don't get it. Like, isn't it a book easier to read when the spine's broken? I guess it's different to like bending it completely, but like it needs to be bended. But I do get it, like when I see after it's bent, like, and you're reading it constantly and then you see the kind of cracks in the spines, it does kind of like hurt me a little bit. But yeah, I get it. I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but this person was saying that they don't like if a character's called Chris Jones, when they're being referred to is either that it's like Chris half the time and Jones half the time, which I agree. It kind of gets confusing. This is similar with nicknames. If you're talking about a character and they might have a nickname, just use their nickname throughout, or just use their first name throughout. Don't just keep on switching because it gets confusing and then you don't know if they're a separate person. They also pointed out the fact that like when it's a harder name or complicated name, it gets harder to remember and say, especially when it's like multiple complicated names or they're similar. So like one thing that I've definitely like taken more care of in my writing is not to have names that are similar to each other. Like you shouldn't have Sarah and Sarah, even if you spelled them completely differently. It's going to confuse the reader to have Sarah and Sarah. I was guilty of this too when I like started writing. They're talking about accents and how instead of in the dialogue, instead of in the main part of the speech paragraph saying, oh, they have like an accent, they would spell it as if they're talking in the accent. So like instead of talking about a German man, instead of saying that, they would say that. In the dialogue they write that. They said that was one of their pet peeves, and I think this is one thing that I was kind of guilty of, is if they're like speaking, if a child's like speaking incorrectly, I would just write the whole dialogue incorrectly for them. At least just have one letter, not like the whole sentence just written incorrectly if it's a child. And also, on another note, children aren't dumb. Like children, they might not be able to say their W's or L's or R's, but they're not like they do know how to speak most words. So that's just something to point out. Like remember, they do know how to speak certain words. So instead of like write dialogue incorrectly, just describe how they're saying it. Yeah, just to clarify, it's like it's okay to do it a bit, but if it's the whole time that person's speaking and you're writing it like that, it just gets jarring and it gets too much. And this other person said, when a third person narration uses colloquial shortening of words outside of actual dialogue, such as using bononks instead of binoculars. You know what, I get it. It took me a while because I was reading this book called A Death Awaits in Durham, and it took me a while to get used to the colloquial terms. So I do get what they're saying. Another person said, repeated random cliches in dialogue, especially from different characters, it makes them look like the author doesn't. It makes it seem like the author doesn't bother to develop different voices for different characters. Their personalities don't stand out as much. For instance, although I love the Walking Dead comics, if I see one more person say, "We could make a life here," or "get along like a house of fire," I am going to chuck the thing out a window. Talking about cliches, I found myself using them a lot, which I think isn't a bad thing. Definitely something that I am improving in the editing. They're found everywhere. But I do get what they're saying. It gets quite frustrating and annoying, and it just feels so formulaic. Like, oh, this person's gonna say this. You know they're gonna say this. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that, and see you later.